House will come back to order. House will come back to order. Mr. Clerk, you want to ring the bell? Clerk will read the caption to a group of privilege resolutions.
Commemorating and honoring the life and memory of Hazel Batchelor Yancey. Recognizing, commending Cade Bailey Ply. Congratulating, commending Jane Rollins for receiving the 2022 Yellow Rose Nikki T. Randall Service Leader Award. Recognizing, commending Ms. Marcia Denise Ford for extraordinary service and leadership. Recognizing and commending Bobby L. McMillan, and for other purposes. That completes the reading of the privilege resolutions.
Is there any objection to the adoption of the privilege resolutions? Chair hears none and the resolutions are adopted. We're going back to the rules calendar. Going back to the rules calendar. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 1384.
House Bill 1384 by Representative Jenkins, the 132nd, to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 8223 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to amendment and revision of codes generally so as to require the Department to amend the Georgia State Minimum Standard Codes to authorize certain uses of ungraded lumber. This bill having referred to the Committee on Agriculture and Consumer Affairs, that committee recommends that this bill do pass.
Chair recognizes Representative Jenkins to present the bill.
Greetings, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. House Bill 1384 modifies the Georgia building codes to allow ungraded lumber to be used for structural purposes in uninhabited and residential outbuildings. The use of ungraded lumber will allow farmers and homeowners to have access to lower cost structures and help small business owners who own and operate these small mills gain access to the marketplace. This bill should create a larger market for urban wood and unmarketable timber that typically winds up in landfills and being burned as rubble. To speak to this, just talk a little bit about lumber grading. What this does is this allows ungraded lumber to be used in these structures. Essentially, lumber grading allows lumber to be produced with known qualities. It allows it to be sold, be purchased in large quantities and bought sight unseen. Obviously, in these type applications, that's a lot less important with typically lumber that's produced on someone's own property. In looking for a solution to this, there's several other states who have already addressed this issue. We looked at North Carolina, New Hampshire, New York, and Wisconsin. In working on this bill, this was vetted through the Georgia Department of Agriculture, the Georgia Forestry Commission, the Warnell School of Forestry, the Georgia Forestry Association, and the Georgia Association of Realtors have expressed support for this bill. And pending your questions.
Questions if you care to yield.
I yield.
Chair recognizes Representative Jasmine Clark to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Could you expound upon the type of uninhabited dwellings that this ungraded lumber would be used for? I just want to clarify exactly what type of structures this is being used for.
Right. In general, an uninhabited dwelling would be something someone doesn't sleep in. It would be a barn, an outbuilding, not something that would have a bedroom that someone would actually use as a residence.
Does the gentleman further yield?
I further yield.
So would it be a place like where you might keep animals or where you might store things where the integrity of the wood might still be necessary?
Well, yes, integrity of wood is necessary, but that integrity can be assured without formal grading by a private lumber grading organization. We'll still have building inspectors, the carpenters that actually erect the structure will also do that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you further yield?
I further yield.
Chair recognizes Chairman Burchett to your left for a question. I'm sorry, to your right.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Is this your first bill?
It is my first bill.
Very good. I was going to direct you to line 14 of the bill. It says all laws and parts of laws in conflict shall be repealed. Which laws are we repealing?
Laws in conflict.
Thank you, Representative.
Yes.
Do you further yield?
I'll yield for one more.
Chair recognizes Chairman Knight to your right for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Good answer on that last question, sir.
Okay.
All seriousness on this bill, as this state, I guess, becomes more and more metropolitan, we must remember that in rural areas and with lean-tos, pole barns, things of that nature, that this is a very important bill. I want to say thank you for bringing it. Thank you for also making sure that we're taking care of the rest of Georgia.
Thank you,
rural
sir.
Georgia.
And Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines on the passage of House Bill 1384. The ayes are 149, the nays are 2. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 1331.
House Bill 1331 by Representative Meeks, the 179th, be entitled an act to amend Title 34 of the Official Code of Georgia and Territory relating to labor and industrial relations so as to change certain provisions relating to the State Employment Service in the Employment Security Administration Fund. This bill having referred to the Committee on Industry and Labor, that committee recommends that this bill do pass.
Chair recognizes Representative Meeks to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to bring to you House Bill 1331. 33. It's an important number in a work of literature that I happen to be reading these days, and it's no coincidence of the number of that bill. As legislators and our duty as a whole, it is important that we work and move in the right direction. House Bill 1333 is a bill that does exactly that. Just as a drop of water does not rest where it lands, neither does the legislation that we pass here. The way and what we pass here on this floor ripples across our economy, ripples across the families of Georgia, and impacts every single individual who may be seeking employment due to a pandemic, and changes in their workplace. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WOA, is a 4-title federal program. The funding for 2 of those titles currently reside within the jurisdiction of TCSG, one within the Department of Labor, and then one within the Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Services. What this bill does is moves Title III funding from the Department of Labor to TCSG. As we know, during this past couple of years, unemployment services has been extremely important to Georgians, and the Department of Labor and TCSG both have duplicative services in this area. So it's very important to streamline this program to make sure that the residents of Georgia and those who are seeking employment services get the best opportunities to find training, as it was mentioned earlier by Chairman England, and being directed to those businesses who have opportunities available for the unemployed. So, Mr. Speaker, that is the bill. The hour is late, and I'm very well aware that speech is silver and silence is golden. So with that, I'll yield for a question.
You have a number of questions,
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker.
so let's see how much knowledge you have acquired. Chair recognizes Representative Fleming to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the gentleman in the well, I appreciate your explanation of the bill. I do think it's important. I was trying to follow some of the things you were talking about initially in your discussion. Given the fact that labor is such an important issue that we're facing in society today, could you talk a little bit, expound a little bit about how your legislation relates to that theory of doing the duty that lies nearest? Could you talk about that a little bit, please?
Yes, sir. I appreciate the opportunity. In doing the duty that lies nearest, the duty right now is making sure that we get the funds to TCSG, that they may better implement the programs that affect Georgians across this state.
Do you further yield?
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Chairman F. Stration to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield for several questions?
Yes, sir.
Representative Meeks, I know you and I have discussed House Bill 1331 before, and in our previous conversations we talked about what will not work except in silence. What is that?
Only thought.
And we've also talked about what is the unanswerable question.
Who am I?
Representative, have you spent time silently thinking about who you are?
I have.
And how has your consideration and you carrying House Bill 1331 helped to inform you about that?
Doing the duty that lies nearest and working for not ourselves but for others.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll yield the well.
The gentleman has wisely yielded the well. We have other members who wish to be heard on the bill. The chair recognizes Representative Bodie to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to HB 1331. First and foremost, I would say that the speaker was absolutely correct. The Georgia Department of Labor has had many challenges that we have all had to deal with and help our constituents to deal with, especially during these 2 years of the pandemic. However, I would be voting yes for this legislation only for one reason I'm going to be voting no, is that this legislation does not have a sunset. Being that it does not have a sunset, this bill will affect General Assemblies and also the Department of Labor, the Commissioner, into perpetuity. Now, I just want to give an example of the reason why we need a sunset. We have elections coming up. All of us in this room are going to have to run for re-election. we're going to have every statewide constitutional officer up for re-election, including the governor, including the labor commissioner. And so, with that being said, why does the labor commissioner of future generations and future years have to suffer because this current labor commissioner did not perform his constitutional duties? And I recall last year, SB 156, bipartisan piece of legislation that pretty much every member in this chamber voted for. That was the Labor Chief Officer Bill, basically an oversight bill. An oversight bill to have the General Assembly and also the governor's office to have this current labor commissioner to report every Monday on how many claims are being filed, how many claims are being paid out, how many appeals have been filed, how many appeals have been heard. Every Monday, this General Assembly and this Speaker of the House would have gotten a report. But the governor vetoed that legislation. And the reason why the governor stated it was an overstep of this General Assembly to basically have the constitutional officer, which is the Department of Labor Commissioner, report to the General Assembly. It's a violation of separation of powers. Executive branch, legislative branch. So I'm trying to find out what changed within a year. I'm trying to find out why on page 3 of SB 156, line 48, section H, this code section shall stand repealed on December the 31st, 2022, unless continued in effect by the General Assembly prior to that date. Why does this legislation not have a sunset? I would vote for this bill if the sunset was December the 31st, 2022. This bill will take away some serious powers from a constitutional officer. One of those powers is to operate the career centers across this state, the one-stop shops. That power will be codified and taken away from the Department of Labor Commissioner. Also, the Department of Labor Commissioner will have to basically transfer any funds that goes into the Unemployment Security Administration Fund on line 50, have the money deposited to the Department of Labor Commissioner, and whenever the governor's designee, who is a political appointee and not an elected official, transfer the money into that designee's account. So, we have a federal act that states traditionally across the state, across this country, traditionally the Department of Labor Commission is the one distributing these federal funds. The governor's designee is not elected by the citizens of this state. The governor designee has to answer only to one person, the governor, and not the citizens of the state of Georgia. So I'm going to ask you to vote no, because this is not bad policy at all. We need to have some coverage over this Department of Labor and this labor commissioner, because we all had to pick up the phone and figure out how can we help our constituents when no one from the Department of Labor would pick up the phone and answer the call of the constituents of this state. And we're still answering those calls today, Republican and Democrat. But I'm just asking that we're fair to the next labor commissioner and allow that person to do their job and prove themselves worthy based upon the citizens of the state that vote them into office. I would vote yes if you had a sunset of December 31st, 2022, but I'll be voting no because you don't. Mr. Speaker, I'll yield the well with no questions.
Is there any, is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the passage of House Bill 1331, the ayes are 90, the nays are 59, the chair votes yea. The bill, having received a requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. What purpose does Representative Cannon rise?
To make a motion.
State your motion.
I'd like to make a motion to serve notice of the intent to have this bill reconsidered on the next legislative day.
Lady has that right. It'll be put down for Tuesday morning, March 15th. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 304.
House Bill 304 by Representative Lott of the 122nd and others to be entitled an act to amend Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to revenue and taxation so as to provide for a tax credit for medical equipment and supply manufacturers and pharmaceutical and medicine manufacturers. This bill having referred to the Committee on Ways and Means, that committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
All right, before we begin this bill, I'm going to ask the clerk to read a rule of this House. Mr. Clerk, proceed.
Rule 135, no member or person shall vote for another member on any question or proposition unless otherwise ordered by the Speaker. Any violation of this rule may be punished by fine, censure, or other action ordered by the House.
Okay. Mr. Clerk, go back and read the caption again to House Bill 304.
House Bill 304 by Representative Lott of the 122nd and others to be entitled an act to amend Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to revenue and taxation so as to provide for a tax credit for medical equipment and supply manufacturers and pharmaceutical and medicine manufacturers. This bill having referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. That committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes Representative Lott to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, each person in this chamber and nearly all Georgians are being painfully affected by devastatingly high gas prices. These skyrocketing gas prices are making work and family commutes extremely difficult for Georgia families. Today, Georgia has recorded its highest ever average price per gallon at $4.29 a gallon. December of 2020, gas was $2.03 per gallon, and the price has been climbing ever since, now reaching this record high. I am honored to stand here today on behalf of our governor to present HB 304. HB 304 suspends state collections of motor fuel taxes through May 31st of 2022 and will be effective upon Governor Kemp's signature. This suspension covers gasoline, diesel, aviation gasoline, liquefied petroleum, and special fuels such as compressed natural gas. Georgia has suspended a gas tax in the past, and it is critical that we consider this action again today. This body has an opportunity to save Georgians near $157 million each month at the pumps. I would ask each of you to join the efforts of Governor Kemp and Speaker Ralston in providing some much-needed relief to Georgia citizens. Mr. Speaker, I yield for questions.
You have a question if you care to yield.
I will yield.
Chair recognizes Representative Park to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentlelady yield?
I do, yes, sir.
So I just had a question. On line 16, why is the date May 31st of 2022 put in here? Is that arbitrary, or is there a specific reason or purpose for it?
So the period was a short time period, and then the governor has the opportunity to do an executive order beyond that if it's necessary, which we would then as a body have to ratify when we return to session.
Thank you. Does the gentlelady further yield?
I do, yes, sir.
So just to clarify, especially in light of the uncertainty that we are experiencing, there will be flexibility provided to the governor to ensure that he does have the ability to lower or remove the gas tax?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask for your favorable consideration on this bill, and I yield the well.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. What purpose does Representative McLaurin rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Rule 133, I ask to be excused from the vote.
Gentleman has that right. Journal will so reflect. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the passage of House Bill 304, the ayes are 150, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 1234.
House Bill 1234 by Representative Ballinger, the 23rd, to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 1511-103, the official code of Georgia Annotated, relating to the right of to an attorney in dependency proceedings, so as to provide for the right to an attorney for any child receiving extended care services from the Division of Family and Children's Services. This bill having referred to the Committee on Juvenile Justice, that committee recommends that this bill do pass.
Chair recognizes Chairman Ballinger to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill number is simple, 1234. It's a very simple one-page bill. A lot of our juveniles, whenever they age out of DFACS, they decide to sign themselves back in. As many of you recall, I carried the bill that extended DFACS services to 21 here in the state of Georgia. This just allows them to have representation whenever they sign themselves back into DFACS care after they've aged out. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
You have a question if you care to yield.
Certainly, I'll yield.
Chair recognizes Representative Cannon to your left for a question.
Thank you. Do you yield?
Yes, ma'am.
How does this bill work in conjunction with the other measure that we passed about the clothing allotment for the year for those who are in these services?
Well, those were for foster children, so I'm not sure. They're obviously receiving services from DFACS. Those services kind of change whenever a child is 18 and independent. I know they provide rent for apartments. They obviously wouldn't do that for a 10-year-old. So I'm not sure about the availability, the array of services that DFACS are offering those 18 to 21-year-olds. But I'll be more than happy to find it for you.
You have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge your favorable consideration.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines on the passage of House Bill 1234. The ayes are 151, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 1193.
House Bill 1193 by Representative Gamble, the 15th, and others, to be entitled, An Act to Amend Part 3 of Article 1 of Chapter 18, Title 43 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to licenses for funeral directors and embalmers, so as to provide for reinstatement of a lapsed funeral director's license under certain conditions. This bill having referred to the Committee on Regulated Industries, that committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes Representative Gamble to present the bill.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, we have a bill before you that will absolutely affect the funeral business in our state. This bill does something that our funeral directors have asked for, and that is to allow a funeral director who has a lapsed license to simply renew their license. Now, if they renew the license, they have to complete all the continuing education that's currently required to meet the satisfaction with the Funeral Service Board, and they have to pay all the fees associated with what they would have paid had they continued to keep their license renewed. It also removes the limitation of being able to apply for apprenticeship twice, and it just removes that altogether so that there is no limit. This is a good bill, and I would ask for this body's favorable consideration. And Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to entertain any questions at this point.
Well, you've got a few.
All right.
Chair recognizes Representative Momtahan to your right for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
I yield to my good friend from Paulding County.
Well, thank you. I just have a quick question. Does this mean that these funeral directors can bring their license back from the dead?
This absolutely means that they can come back from the dead.
Thank you for the bill.
Thank you for your question. Happy to entertain any more questions. Otherwise, I'm going to yield the well and ask for your consideration.
Well, does that mean you yield or you don't yield?
Well, I'll take one more and then I'm going to get out.
One more. Okay, let's see. How about Chair recognizes Chairman Nix to your right for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
I yield.
I hate to say this, but he got my question early there, so I'm going to let you go.
Okay. Thank you so
Well,
much.
you got one more I think you probably ought to take.
All right. I will.
Chair recognizes Representative Bentley to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
I yield for my good friend, yes.
Is it not true, my dear friend, that this bill makes the Strawberry Queen very, very happy?
That is true, and I'm happy to do that.
Is it not further true, my friend, that this bill is going to make me wear my big hat on next Tuesday?
That is definitely true.
And you know, the big hat means the more they paid for the services. The bigger the hat, So thank you so much for your work on this bill, because I'm very happy on this Friday that this bill is going to be passed by every member of this House of Representatives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you so much.
You still want to yield? He has yielded the well. Gentleman has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the passage of House Bill 1193, the ayes are 150, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. House Resolution 594 was reconsidered previously by this body and is back on the general calendar and is called at this time. The clerk will read the resolution to House Resolution, or the caption to House Resolution 594.
House Resolution 594 by Representative Smith, the 70th, proposing an amendment to the Constitution of the State of Georgia so as to provide that county and municipal governing authorities shall be authorized to grant temporary tax relief to properties severely damaged or destroyed as a result of a disaster. This bill having referred to the Committee on Ways and Means, the committee recommends that this resolution be adopted by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes the chair of the Natural Resources and Environment Committee, Chairman Lynn Smith, to present the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. I don't know how many of you this morning were very moved by the sermon we had today from Reverend Russell Bart, and he talked about the greatest commandment, which is love the Lord thy God with all their heart, soul, mind, and spirit, but he spent most of his very excellent preaching time on love your neighbor. And he was pointing out to us that at times we get very confused about where priorities should be. And as tornadoes drop quickly out of the heavens, I'm hoping today from his talk to us this morning, we're going to create manna today instead of a tornado. We have some members who've already left because of the fear of the storm. But we have an opportunity now, I hope, to make a decision, not for ourselves, but going forward for those who might face the same catastrophe that my community faced. And our delegation stood before you and explained to you how devastating it was. So let me recap for you the description of the bill. House Resolution 594 would allow temporary property tax relief for disaster-damaged properties which are located within a nationally declared disaster area. This bill came about because, speaking to local city officials, county officials, they were lamenting the fact that a property owner who lost a house at the end of March paid property tax on something they didn't have to the end of the year. I was told it could not be changed, it could not be done, and with the help of the Ways and Means Committee, we did present to you an idea, a concept, and it almost had the votes it needed the first time we voted, like just a few votes. So I hope this evening that the spirit we hear is not partisan, but more manna from heaven. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
You have a question? Do you have a question? Okay. Do you yield for a question? It's up to you.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I yield for a question. It depends upon where it came from, though.
Let's not start that now. Chair recognizes Representative Donahue to your left for a question.
Does the gentlelady yield?
Yes, I yield.
Thank you. And I appreciate your heart. And that was a great message this morning. Wanted to kind of let you know that we have to be here and help each other's neighbors. But when is the temporary? What does the date or temporary mean?
And so this is, in its fact, temporary, but it's also permissive. And so the action will be created by a general bill if this constitutional amendment passes. And then your local governments, faced with this type of disaster, would meet. They're not obligated to any restrictions we place upon them. It is in their determination what that county or community can afford to do to help give relief to the impacted victims.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
No
Mr.
further
Speaker,
questions.
I yield the well before the next
Yeah,
storm
no
comes my way.
further questions. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the adoption of the resolution? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this resolution now be adopted? All those in favor of adopting House Resolution 594 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine. On the adoption of House Resolution 594, the ayes are 150, the nays are 0. This resolution, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 1358.
House Bill 1358 by Representative Ballinger, the 23rd, and others, to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 3 of Title 12 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to general provisions regarding parks, historic areas, memorials, and recreation, so as to revise provisions of law regarding the use or possession of any handgun. This bill having referred to the Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security, that committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes Chairman Mandy Ballinger to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Liberty, freedom, a lot of these things get bandied around here at the House. This bill, 1358, the Chairman Meadows Bill Act, is to allow people to get the government out of their way. You know, we live in precarious times. There's evil in the world. We need to protect ourselves. And this bill allows us to do so without having to pay money to the government to do it. All of our other constitutional rights assured to us don't require a fee to the government to exercise. We can say what we want, we can assemble, we can worship as we please. All of these rights, none of them we have to pay for. But this bill gets the government out of our way and allows us to do what we need to do in these precarious times. These are law-abiding citizens. There are a lot of federal prohibitors out there. Obviously, we can't change those. But those law-abiding citizens need to be able to exercise a fundamental constitutional right without interference or payment to the government. Mr. Speaker, the hour, I know, is very late. People are very tired. So that's the end of my remarks. And I'm not going to yield for questions. I don't think anybody here is going to be persuaded one way or the other by my answer or anything else. If anybody has any legitimate questions about the bill, I'm happy to answer those. Come see me over there. A lot of people have signed up to speak, so we have plenty of time to answer those individual questions, and I'll be more than happy to do that. Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
The lady has yielded the well. Rules Committee limited debate to 30 minutes to each side. I'll let y'all allocate that between yourselves. Chair recognizes Representative Hutchinson to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is my first time in the well for a speech, so here we go. I'd like to start by saying that I am a concealed carry permit holder. I want to repeat that. I am a concealed carry permit holder. Because there seems to be a misconception that you cannot advocate for gun safety and be a gun owner at the same time. I can see lots of my colleagues who I know have concealed carry permits, but they can also advocate for gun safety. I'll be honest, I am a city girl. I was born and raised in the suburbs of New Orleans before we had to worry about carjackings. There was no reason for us to have a gun, none. My dad, he's a city boy, same thing. His parents did not have guns. He didn't have guns. He didn't need one. He was in a place of safety. My mother's family, on the other hand, lives in rural Louisiana. The Mississippi River is in their backyard. The Gulf of Mexico is about 3 blocks away in the front. Tons of critters. My grandfather shot everything that was moving in his yard, except for his grandchildren, thankfully. We never had guns in my house, and I chose not to have a gun when my kids were little because of the statistic that if we had a gun in the house, we were more likely to shoot each other than we were to someone breaking into my house. But in 2020, I was watching a presidential debate. And during that debate, it was told to people with some of the worst behavior to stand back and stand by. Stand back, but stand by. I immediately grabbed my computer and bought a gun online. I live 1 country block away from Academy Sports. I bought the gun online. I got an email that said, your gun's ready for pickup. Walked down the street, picked up the gun, no problems. But the salesperson said, what happened last night? I said, I don't know, what happened last night? He said, I don't know either, but we ran out of guns last night. We sold out of guns last night. So I wasn't the only one who thought that is a bad omen to stand back and stand by. But I also, in the same day, signed up me, my husband, and my 2 kids for gun safety classes. Not gun target practice, not going to the shooting range and practice. We had sit-down classes with my entire family. Now you fast forward to today, and I'm an empty nester. Now usually when I say that, I do a cartwheel, but since I'm wearing a dress, I'm not going to. My kids are both in school in the UK. The biggest reason why they're in school in the UK is because it's cheaper. And you can ask me about that later. But another reason why they're in the UK is I do not have to worry about my kids getting shot in the UK. The US has gun deaths 100 times more than they have in the UK. Even the police do not have guns. I am the mother of a black 18-year-old child. He's still a child to me. I don't have to worry about him getting shot in the UK. People ask me, don't you miss your kids? They're so far away. No, because they're safer there. They are safer in the UK than they are in Snellville. That's a big deal for me. I'm not losing sleep about my kids in the UK because even the cops don't have guns. Now, When I was a new candidate, I went to all the new candidate trainings. One of those trainings, it was several days, and I connected with this lady there. And we had meals together, we were in groups together. And at the end of that training, we had to give our stump speech. Now, my stump speech was mediocre at best, but her stump speech, she started with, "I am the mother of Jordan Davis." And it had to be a couple of weeks before that I watched the movie, or the documentary, 3.5 minutes, 10 bullets. And that is the documentary of Jordan Davis's murder. As a mom, that documentary was gut-wrenching, and it was fresh in my mind. So when she got up and she said, "I'm the mother of Jordan Davis," that was her only child who was murdered that day. I lost it. I was so overwhelmed by emotion that day that she wound up comforting me. It was her child that died, but she comforted me because I was so emotional that day when she said that. And as a mother, that is the worst possible thing that can happen to me. Something happens to my kids. That's why they're in the UK, and that's why I feel good about them being in the UK, and I would be afraid if my 18-year-old black son were here. So I don't really care about it's not the gun, it's the person, or this is our unfettered constitutional right. I thought voting was an unfettered constitutional right, but we got all kinds of hoops we got to jump through now. The fact is, our kids are dying. They're dying. And I know that this is a bipartisan goal to make Georgia safe enough for my kids to come here and me not lose sleep thinking my 21-year-old black girl and my 18-year-old black boy is out in the line of fire. And I know that that's a bipartisan goal. And for that, I ask you to vote no to this measure to keep our kids and our neighbors and our families safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Roberts to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, I'm also going to start with, I'm pro Second Amendment. When I was about 10 years old, a man was selling cleaning products door to door, and he tried to force his way into our home. Luckily, a neighbor had called just before to warn us, but I remember my mom going and buying a gun almost immediately afterwards, going to the sheriff's office to train and get her permit. I believe we should be able to protect our families. That said, like the majority of Americans and Georgians, I believe in common sense regulations such as background checks. Permitless carry would allow people to carry guns openly or concealed without a weapons carry license or criminal history check, thereby dismantling Georgia's system of responsible gun ownership. It would also deprive law enforcement of this vital check, which seems completely inconsistent to me because all of us in this chamber support law enforcement. Now, I know the response is going to be, but criminals don't apply for carry permits. Well, I have some statistics from Kevin Holder, the Executive Director of Council of Probate Judges. Now, all counties report the total number of applications processed, but the law doesn't require them to report denials. So these numbers are probably underreported. In 2018, 2,654 applications were denied, and 11 counties didn't report, including 3 of our largest. In 2019, 2,854 permits were denied, 11 counties still not reporting. In 2020, 5,292 denials with 4 counties not reporting, including Gwinnett, which has over 1 million people. Guess what the #1 reason is for a denial? Criminal history. Mental health history is also another one that a judge can deny a permit on. So let that settle in. More than 5,000 applicants, likely with criminal or mental health histories, were denied a carry license. The other thing, just like Representative Hutchison talked about, I have a daughter graduating from high school, and one of the reasons that I am supporting her going to Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland, is because it has always terrified me that you can carry guns on college campuses. And now we are removing, in light of increased mental health, we're all seeing the mental health numbers skyrocket. And we all know on college campuses we have excessive drinking. So again, we're relaxing the minimal restrictions we have. And so I feel safer with her going to college in Ireland. I know y'all are tired. I know you've heard these. I know it's not going to change your vote. But I got to tell you, I have constituents who are terrified for their children, for their families. I will never forget in early February 2018 when Bridget, my daughter, came home from middle school describing for the first time an active shooter drill. She talked about how scary it was to have to crawl on a shelf in a closet and sit in the dark for what felt like forever. Made me start thinking about what kind of drills I did as a child. I'm from Dalton, Georgia. We did tornado drills in the South, right? My dad's job moved us to California, so middle school and high school, we did earthquake drills. But it makes my stomach turn that our children are sitting in dark spaces, fearing for their lives that a shooter is going to take them out. I can't even handle it. And that was early February 2018. 2 weeks later, I found myself sobbing on the sofa again as the Parkland incident, was on the screen of my TV. And I got angry because I realized it had been 6 years since we watched babies being killed at Sandy Hook, and not a damn thing had changed. I signed up to run for office 2 weeks later. And guess what, y'all? Nothing has still changed. Instead, you're wanting to relax what little check we have. And why? What for? Because it's inconvenient for law-abiding citizens to fill out a form? Oh my goodness, I just told you statistics that more than 5,000 people were denied permits, likely because of criminal history and mental health. So I gotta ask you, we don't know how many people we kept safe by denying those permits. But I gotta ask you, if you thought filling out that little piece of paper might stop a non-law-abiding citizen or somebody with a mental health history from hurting one child in this state, wouldn't you just prioritize filling out the paper instead of the inconvenience? I'm sorry. When did we become this society that it's all about, we're so self-centered, it's my freedom, my rights, my. This filling out a paper is just inconvenient. It's a common sense check that keeps our law enforcement safe and could keep our families safe. So if you have any, I plead with you, please say no to this bill.
Chair recognizes Representative Wilson to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, before we take this vote, I have some tough questions to ask. Why is it that we will not listen to law enforcement on this issue? Why is it that the people in this room think that they know better than our law enforcement officers, our sworn deputies, on how to keep our communities safe? With this bill, we're not being proactive in preventing gun violence. We're being reactive for political gain. That's all this is. Over the last couple of years, during the pandemic, we had an uptick in violent crimes in communities that I live in. And it was covered all over the news, and we had multiple hearings under the Gold Dome to address this. Were those hearings just for show? We had law enforcement officers, chiefs of police that were asked, what can we do? What can we as lawmakers do to make our streets safer, to make your jobs safer? Do something about all the guns. That's what they said. Do anything. Require a lockbox in the car. Don't force us to resell the firearms that we confiscate. Help us do anything to limit the number of guns. But this is an election year. In fact, my memory is long enough to remember the governor promising when he ran in 2018. But this bill could not be more misguided. Because let's be clear, this is an extreme policy position. We're saying you need a license to drive a car, but not to have a gun. How does that make any sense? I won't belabor the point here because I think this year especially, we've all witnessed the pressures that the majority party is under. Pressure to cater to far-right activists that are so disconnected from reality, they cannot be reasoned with. Almost every session, you give them a nibble of what they want. But this is a whole lot more than just a nibble. So even if you won't vote against this measure, I just want you to think seriously about the consequences of us being unable to know that firearms in this state are in safe hands. It is going to mean more crime, more shootings. More guns equal more shootings. It's not complicated. It's very simple, in fact. If that is the manufactured crisis that you want to happen so that you can continue to take political advantage of it, then I guess it may make sense. But I certainly don't agree with it. And we know for a fact the majority of Georgians, the vast majority of Georgians, do not agree with it. So for the sake of our communities, I ask that you vote no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, we have others that wish to speak, and so the chair recognizes Chairman Setzler to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I rise today in support of HB 1358, which, when you break it down, is a common sense bill. It's a common sense bill, and I'm sad to see that members of the minority party are trying to make accusations that this is being done for political gain. They make reference to election year and these kinds of things. But if we boil down the circumstance about someone having the ability to exercise their basic right to self-defense, the basic right to defend themselves, we find that weapons carry licenses, when it really comes down to it, only do one thing. Weapons carry licenses only prevent law-abiding citizens from being able to defend themselves when they really, really need to. Lawbreakers don't need a weapons carry permit. They're going to break the law. They're going to perpetrate violence and crime like Sandy Hook and Charleston, South Carolina, some of the things that were alluded to earlier. Those violent crimes were not perpetrated by law-abiding citizens. They were perpetrated by killers intent on killing others and breaking the law. The reference was made to the mentally unstable. Mentally unstable people who are intent on using firearms to create terror do so by breaking the law. The only impact that weapons carry permits have is if someone is in need to defend themselves, to prevent them from doing it. Because law-abiding citizens who follow the law, who would otherwise need a permit to carry a firearm to defend themselves, would be inhibited from doing it as a law-abiding citizen. So as I talk to folks, and as folks here in Georgia are listening to this debate, let's boil it down to what this is really about. My mom's a very, very small lady. She's 4'11", and has always been the person of very slight build, not super athletic. And I can imagine if we were in downtown Atlanta, and my mom is a young mom, there's moms out there all across Georgia and all across the metro area that would look much like her, a very petite lady. Imagine her pushing a baby stroller down the street in metro Atlanta. Imagine, to their horror, hypothetically, we can imagine this though, that someone were to jump out and try to snatch her child. I mean, if someone were to snatch the child of that person, a big athletic man, and jump in a truck or a van and drive away, does she have the ability to defend herself and her child with her own hands? Of course not. She is physically being dominated by somebody who's athletically just overwhelming to her. I know a good friend who actually served with us in this General Assembly that had trained a constituent of his who never thought that she would need a firearm, but 3 months after she had decided to carry one, was actually downtown in Lenox Mall, and she was loading Christmas presents into the back of her car, and a man came up behind her and said, "Ma'am, I'm going to take your purse from you," and was going to take her purse. Having availed herself of the opportunity to carry a firearm, she turned and pulled up on him. The man kind of freaked out, didn't expect this petite young lady to be carrying a firearm, and withdrew immediately, and she was saved, and she saved herself without firing a shot, but by having that equalizer. Friends, people who don't have the ability to carry that equalizer with them expose themselves to dangers that we can only think about in horror. And the reason HB 1358 is so important, friends, is because many people, when threats present themselves, don't have time to go down to the probate court judge's office, get their fingerprints, get things sent back to them, go through the process and have a permit sent to them in a period of weeks. In fact, in many counties, my county in particular, during COVID, there was a process. You had to register online, you had to schedule an appointment. It was a really, really long and drawn out process. But whether it's a long and drawn out process in your county or whether it's something that happens in 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, if a threat is made on your life that's not anticipated, if for the first time in your life, you, whether you're a big, strong, athletic male or a small, slight, petite woman like my mom and family members, if a threat is made on your life that you know you can't defend yourselves, you're terrified, otherwise rendered fearful to stay in your house, you don't have time to go get a concealed carry permit. You don't have time to get a weapons carry permit and wait the weeks it takes to get that in. Friends, if you're a person like many Georgians, when you need to defend yourselves against potential aggressors, you don't have weeks to wait when seconds count. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, 1358 is a common sense bill because in spite of all the images created by the minority party in challenging this, common sense tells us lawbreakers don't need a permit. The only thing only people that are inhibited by this weapon carry license is law-abiding citizens who follow the law and would otherwise need to defend themselves. Nothing in this law requires Georgians to carry a firearm. If you as a Georgian don't want to carry a firearm, don't carry one. But if you as a Georgian feel the need to, or if you don't feel the need to today, but the time comes in which you do, your family is threatened, or you feel a threat that emerges very quickly, this bill provides you the ability to protect yourself, provide the equalizer that's essential to preserve you and your family. And I think it's a good common sense law that we can all support and be proud of. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield the will.
Chair recognizes Chairman Heath Clark to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is something I don't do a lot. I've been here for 8 years, and it's very rare for me to get in the well to speak to somebody else's bill. But I'm here today to speak in support of this bill. And I know there's people that are good people, honest people, caring people, that we're just going to disagree on this legislation. But I just want to explain why I'm supporting this bill and why I would try to urge some of the people who might be on the fence to support this. First of all, this bill does not change who can carry or where you can carry. It simply says if you meet all of the qualifications that the state has laid out to be able to carry a firearm in this state, that you can carry that firearm without having to ask permission and pay what is essentially a tax. That's the bill. The state has laid out all the requirements to qualify to carry a firearm. And if you meet those qualifications, you can carry. In fact, most people, what we know in other states, 16 other states have passed this legislation as of yesterday, and most people in those states still apply for a license. Why is that? Reciprocity in other states and expedited gun purchases. When you show up at a licensed firearm dealer with a Georgia weapons carry license, they know that you have a valid background check, and so you're able to receive that firearm in a more expedient way. If you do not have a Georgia weapons carry license and you go to purchase a firearm, they have to run a background check on you. That's the federal law. You know, there's a lot of talk out there about gun show loopholes and all of that. There is no such thing. That is a misconception that there is no such thing as a gun show loophole. The people at a gun show are federally licensed firearm dealers, and in order for them to sell a firearm, they have to have a background. You have to have a background check. So, most people would still elect to receive the Georgia weapons carry license so that they can expedite their gun purchases and have reciprocity in other states. So, you know, it was mentioned earlier about we're being proactive and not reactive, and that's not totally true either. One thing that we've seen through COVID, I believe one lady was speaking about purchasing a firearm, and they showed up at Academy, and they were talking about all the guns being sold out, and that was something that happened during COVID. And we saw that. But what wasn't talked about a whole lot was the significant delays in people being able to receive their Georgia weapons carry license when the courts were shut down during COVID. That has not been publicized, that has not been talked about, and that is an infringement upon the Second Amendment. You could go purchase a firearm, but you cannot possess and carry that firearm outside of your house or car, because the courts of this state did not process, and there's still a huge backlog. We're talking longer than 6 months in some cases to receive that Georgia weapons carry license. So that is an infringement upon the right of that person to be able to carry and exercise their Second Amendment right. What good is owning a gun if you can't, a firearm, if you can't carry it to protect yourself and the purpose that people have purchased those firearms to begin with? I know one speaker mentioned voting and how we have to jump through loopholes to vote. I would disagree with that, but let's compare the two. Currently, to go vote, you show up and you present your license and validate who you are, and then you're given a card and you go into the booth and you vote. You cast your ballot. You go put it, and then you take the paper, you put it in the machine, it casts your ballot for you. Compare that to what we do with guns. You go to a store, you present your license to validate who you are, and they do a background check and see if that's who you are, and they validate that. But in order to carry that firearm, you have to go and then fill out more paperwork, get a license, a concealed carry license, and then you can carry it and pay a $75 fee. If we're going to really compare the two, that would essentially be we need to start charging a poll tax again and make people pay to practice the fundamental right of voting. And I would disagree with that, just like I disagree with forcing people to pay a tax to carry their firearm. And so, like I said, Mr. Speaker, 16 states have already put this into practice. A lot of the concerns we've heard have not been played out in those states. And I would just urge people, if you're on the fence right now, still on the fence about this, again, this bill doesn't change who can carry or where you can carry. It just simply says if you meet the qualifications that we have laid out for you to exercise your Second Amendment right, that you can do so. And that's the bill, Mr. Speaker. And I would just urge people to vote in favor of this legislation. Thank you, and I yield the will.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. We have a minority report, and then we have the chairman's time. 20 minutes for the minority report and 20 minutes for the chair's time. Chair recognizes. What purpose does the minority caucus whip rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that we table House Bill 1358.
Gentleman has moved that House Bill 1358 be tabled. All those in favor of the motion will vote aye. Those opposed to tabling will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machine. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the gentleman's motion, the ayes are 52, the nays are 91. The motion fails. We go on now to the minority report, and the chair recognizes Representative Holly for the minority report. Gentlemen, suspend. All right, this House will come to order. House will come to order. We have a minority report in chairman's time. They're entitled to your respect. Gentlemen may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Something as I sat here and I remembered, actually I have to even say this because I've never spoken to a bill from the well before. I'm just thankful to God for allowing for me to be here in this place. I used to work within walking distance down that way for judges, who included Judge Kimberly Warden, who I know is looking down from heaven right now. And I'm just happy I'm be here, and hopefully I can make you proud. I come to you today, I rise to ask you to join me in voting no for this bill. Much to like my colleague from the 35th came here and I'm able to speak about how it was so important for us to look at law-abiding citizens. But then at the same breath said that those same law-abiding citizens would find it too cumbersome to go before a constitutional officer in a probate court and get an approval through a permit. We look at line 68 of the bill, and it tries its best to define lawful weapons carrier. But no matter how you define it, there are only just carriers. just as there are only citizens and not law-abiding citizens. We're just citizens. Jails all across Georgia are filled with folks who thought they were law-abiding citizens until they were not. We all tell ourselves that we're going to obey each law until someone we love gets harmed. Maybe a daughter of yours, maybe a niece, something happens to them. And then all of a sudden, you just might snap. You might do something that's outside of what the law will allow. Then all bets are off. You know, when I was writing those domestic violence warrants, the little pink warrants, I always bear in mind the fact that just with that pen, the ability to enforce that law is necessary just to defend the lives of those not only who are at the hands of those who are violent, but also those who are going to be responding to that violence, the ones who are going to protect us. And the Georgia Commission on Family Violence reports that a whopping 84% of the family-related deaths this year come at the hands of someone who was holding a gun. Does that sit with us right now? 84%. Literally, we're looking at the fact that when it comes to law abiding, it's what we all hope for. But each of us has the right to either choose, yes, we're going to do right, or choose against it. However, those Americans who are dealing with severe stress, very deep pains for which they have sought help or maybe have not sought help, making the right choice is not so clearly black and white as it may be for the lawmakers in this room. Ask any prosecutor will tell you the criminal offenses in the Georgia Code describe acts which a person's culpability to commit that crime must be determined in order for those charges to stick. A person's mindset, along with the review of the circumstances leading up to the actions, can determine the extent of the danger imposed on themselves or others. Now, yes, much has been discussed this legislative session in the way of mental health, from counseling to special living facilities to peer groups that help folks who are unfortunately trauma bonding in their time of anguish. And these are really great benefits. I don't make any effort here to diminish them because they do have value. But when folks with severe mental issues and deeply painful experiences can just go drive down to their local gun shop, heck, they can get and go online right now and be able to purchase a gun without so much as telling a Georgia licensed physician or counselor for a screening or to ask permission to help keep other Americans safe, then won't it be our legislature who has failed them? We're putting our own communities at risk. Now please, I don't want you to get it twisted. I have a very, very healthy appreciation for our Second Amendment rights. I mean, we could talk days upon days between Browning and Gatling, and I even like howitzers, and I know that's not even a gun. But the problem still is that we still have a very, very precarious situation that we're leaving our law enforcement officers in. The men and women that I used to have to take in their warrants, from local folks to even the GBI. And we're not even just talking about the measures to keep folks safe with a permit. Let's talk about training. The fact that those same courthouses are worked at, walk a little further up, you'll find Georgia Post. That's right. Peace officers, there's training standards, the standards of training. It's necessary to be able to not only have that permit, but also to be able to know how to use that firearm. And yet there is nothing in this bill that is stating that it's going to be necessary for people to even be able to know how to use that firearm. And that's really the tough part about this. Look, we know it's an election year. And so many here have been pressured. I mean, we're all here. We put up a big black fence around this place and you think you're secure. But you know good and well that there's law enforcement officers from our Georgia Capitol Police to those who are in our local communities. I wanted to highlight for you even today up here, unfortunately we're not showing them, but even 4 officers that we found even in 2021 who were unfortunately gunned down trying to serve the public. Our colleagues from the 171st District, the 31st, the 149th, and the 75th certainly have heard about Captain Justin Bedwell, certainly know the sacrifices of Sheriff Lena Marshall. They know Corporal Dylan Harrison, and certainly for those in Clayton County, know Officer Henry Laxon. I know for those residents who live with me in Henry County, we certainly know the sacrifice of Officer Paramans Desai. These are people who kiss their families, their wives goodbye, hug their children, get out here, and hopefully we can keep them safe by just asking for a small document, a paper, to be approved of by a constitutional officer, a judge who was sworn to the duty of protecting the public. We respected those constitutional officers here enough to give them a pay raise. But are we still so bold not to listen to the cries of those family members who have lost an officer that they lent to us as soon as they left after their house? And here today, there's a bill that the Georgia Sheriff's Association does not want us to pass. Here is a bill that the Georgia Association for the Chiefs of Police asks us not to go through with. And yet here today, are we really going to allow for an election to cause us to turn our backs on the men and the women who have come to us to try to protect our communities? I really don't think this is the time for us to take up these matters. This is something that, if we're not going to table it, here's what I would suggest you do, because the public is not aware fully of what goes on here. If you believe that this measure is causing you to do as my colleague from the Warner Robins area suggested, that you're on the fence, this is probably a time where a local law enforcement officer who knows you, that you talk to, someone that you have long trusted for their opinion, this might be the time that they call you on your phone, and you will need to take that call to understand what their concerns are for this measure and how it will put their lives in jeopardy. So that's all here. I think we all are very clear about what's going to happen in this place. But I must say, I really wish God would be with the officers who come to their next traffic stop, because they have you to thank for the next actions from here. That's all.
Chair recognizes Representative McLaurin for the balance of the minority report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes I think some folks in here probably think, with the amount of, flailing around I do, that I don't love this building. I love this building. I love this building for the people in it. A lot of times I'll stop by the minority leader's desk and I'll say, man, this building. And the minority leader will say, this building. And then I'll walk away. And that's the whole conversation. But I promise you, I treasure my relationships with you in this place. And I look up listening to my colleague, and I look at the ornate decorations, and I think about legacy. And listen, I'm getting nostalgic because I'm leaving. And so, it's that quote from Gladiator: when a man sees his end, he wants to know that there was some purpose to his time and special rules. You know what I mean? I mean, that's the kind of sentiment that I'm bringing to you right now. So let's talk about legacy, because I feel qualified after a couple years to speak even just a little bit about legacy. And this bill is steeped in legacy. It comes from a very specific place, a very specific identity of a former state representative. And that former state representative is Matt Gertler. This is Matt Gertler's bill. This is his old HB 2, constitutional carry, some version of it. And do you remember what a pariah he was when he was in this body? He came up to this well for a morning order. I mean, literally any air you gave this guy, he'd come up and be like, have y'all heard about constitutional carry? If you haven't, we'll dedicate another minute of the time for Colton Moore to come up and tell you the same thing. HB 2, y'all. What do you think the #1 email y'all got in the 2019-2020 term was? Right answer. HB 2, constitutional carry, brought to you by Matt Gertler, one of my favorite members of the House just because of his energy, man. I called him a liberty robot. Because that's what he was. He was like, vote no. I mean, 50% of the time he voted no on like every bill, including the good ones. And why did he do it? Because he had this calculus that liberty was simple. Liberty's not complicated. Liberty's easy to protect. Vote no, boom, go home, get reelected, right? I had a game. This is not a joke. Well, it is a joke, but it's not. This is what I'm saying is true. I had a game show I played with myself. Imagine Game Show Network, why did Gertler vote no? And so I would see his no vote. It'd be 1 or 2 no votes, and I'd think to myself, okay, I'm going to go up to him and I'm going to guess the reason he voted no. And sometimes it was really fun. I mean, he had that one with the cable bill, cable service for military folks, right? You go overseas, you're serving your country, and the good people in the Republican Party in the Georgia State Legislature said, we're going to let those people out of their cable contracts early. That's the least thing we can do for active duty military. And Gertler was like, nah, man, no, you're stuck in that cable contract, right? And so I went up to him later and I was like, hey, Gert, I got this little game I play where I try to guess why you voted no. Tell me why you voted no. I said, is it because freedom of contract, right? We don't want the government to interfere with freedom of contract. He goes, easy, and he walked off. So he was the liberty robot. He is who this is about. That type of thinking, that there's no nuance to liberty, that freedom is an absolute. And this House not only blocked him, but took pride in blocking him. No, sir, Representative Matt Gertler, you're not even going to get the slightest bit of air. We'll give you morning order time, but you will never pass a bill. You're always on the wrong side of this chamber, and everything you stand for is not what we in the majority stand for. I mean, you could not have been more of a pariah than Matt Gertler. Just the rousing celebration when his replacement came, and I love his replacement. But this House was overjoyed when it got rid of Gert. But here we are passing his bill. So what changed? What changed? The very first words out of the author's mouth were freedom and liberty are words we bandy around. Did y'all care about freedom in 2019? Did you care about liberty in 2020? Or did you just figure it out this year? That Matt Gertler was right the whole time? When I first joined the House, a member of House leadership said to me with great gravity that I appreciated, that I still appreciate when I look at this ceiling and I think about the honor of being here, that some people just want to burn this building down, and they don't care. I think about my no votes on the local calendar. It actually kind of sucks because I get emails from your constituents saying, you voted no on our local bill, why do you care? Because I'm making a protest, obviously. Because you didn't care about what our local governments wanted to do. So why should we care about yours, man? But I care about this institution, and that member of House leadership said to me, some people just want to burn the building down, and Gertler's one of those people. I guess that sentiment holds when there's only a handful of people that you say it about, when the rest of us are steady-handed and civilized. But I guess if the whole majority and the whole House wants to finally burn it down together, then it's not burning it down anymore, apparently. Every Democrat who spoke from the well tonight flipped one of your seats on the message that the public doesn't want stuff like this. Go through the list. We hold formerly Republican districts where people with certain demographics, whatever, believe that they need representatives who are not going to buy into this drift right BS to appeal to the base. It's not an accident that we came up here to deliver this message.
The majority party has made the calculation that the short-term boost they get for the base outweighs long-term damage to the brand and public policy consequences. That is what you own tonight. And let me tell you something. Matt Gertler's no longer here. Y'all took him out. Somebody posted an Ocean's 11 gif of like, we did our work. We got rid of the guys that were on the other side, and now we can sail off into the sunset. We're so happy. Celebration all around. But even though Matt Gertler's not here, even though he's in D.C. working for Thomas Massey, helping him put, assault rifles in Christmas cards or whatever, his idea is on the House floor on a Friday night. And even though Matt Gertler's not here tonight, former state representative Matt Gertler tonight wins. Mr. Speaker, I yield the will.
We're going on now to the chairman's time. Chair recognizes Chairman Jay Collins, the chair of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I won't take much of the chairman's time here this evening, but I do find it very ironic that some of the people in this chamber now who wanted to defund the police a few years ago are asking us to trust the police. I find that to be a very rich irony here late in the evening. When I came into this house, I had a lot of people back home in my district who were pushing me on constitutional carry. And if you'll think back about it, I hadn't been one of those people who stood down here in the well or advocated in the hall for constitutional carry. But for me personally, my mind on constitutional carry was changed just a few years ago. Because see, when I go home at night, I drive about 35 miles west into a little community called Villa Rica, Georgia. And when I turned on the TV and I saw our capital city, let's talk about burning. Let's talk about our capital city burning down with rioting and protesting. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about our capital city burning and public safety officials couldn't get post-certified officers, couldn't get police officers to come do their job because they didn't have their back. Let's talk about burning down the capital city 30 miles from my home. And then let's talk about all the people that reached out to legislators and said, I've never had to have a reason to carry a gun, but now that I want to, my probate court is shut down. I can't carry a gun. And they're burning down these neighborhoods right around us. We're seeing violent crime. So yeah, my mind was changed about constitutional carry. One of the things I've heard this evening is we've heard a lot of rhetoric and we've heard a lot of dramatization about what this is going to do and what that's going to do. And I like looking up at this Capitol ceiling as well. But I read a book with my little girl. It's called Chicken Little. The sky is not falling here, ladies and gentlemen. The sky is not falling. No state that has adopted constitutional carry has had to repeal constitutional carry because they've seen blood in the streets. No state that's adopted constitutional carry has come back and said, we made a terrible mistake. Let's put the car in reverse. No state has done that. As a matter of fact, I believe some of the people that are going to come up here and speak to the balance of the chairman's time may allude to some of that. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm with you about burning down the building. That changed my idea about what constitutional carry meant to me and my family 30 miles west when we saw the absence of public safety during rioting and looting. And Mr. Speaker, I'm going to yield the balance of the chairman's time to two speakers.
Chair recognizes Chairman Ballinger for a portion of the chairman's time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Curiously, nobody came and asked me any questions. But there were some falsehoods that were told up here, and I feel incumbent to clarify them. Our sheriffs, the Georgia Association of the Sheriff's Association here in Georgia, I texted their executive director. They are neutral on this bill. The chiefs of police, they are also neutral on this bill. As for it being Gertler's bill. That's not Gertler's name up there. That's mine. I signed this bill. This bill is mine. Their permitless carry has been filed 7 or 8 times in the last 6, 7 years by various members of this body. But that's my name up there, and this bill is mine. This does not do away background checks. You have to have a background check to even buy a gun. Only people that meet the current permit requirements will be able to exercise permitless carry. Y'all, there's evil in the world. Our courts have ruled that our hands are deadly weapons. Should we chop everybody's hands off? Give us all little hooks? Cars, knives, fertilizers, IED, all of those things people use to hurt others. There's evil. We need to protect ourselves. We do listen to our law enforcement officers, but we do need to not neglect our personal responsibility. Driving is a privilege, not a right, so says our courts. It is not in the Constitution. You have the right to ride your horse anywhere. You have the right to ride your carriage or your car anywhere. That's not in the Constitution. Our leaders in Congress have not had a constitutional amendment to add driving a car. Therefore, you should have a license and prove that you can exercise that privilege safely on our streets. You know, I'll close with this. Some people say, why do you carry a gun? And I say, because the law enforcement officer is too heavy. I'll yield the well.
Chair recognizes for the remainder of the chairman's time, Chairman Alan Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen. And before I say anything, I want to thank my dear friend, Representative Ballinger, for carrying this bill today. And I'm going to talk about a number of things. And first, I want to get a couple of things off my chest. You know, I heard some of the opposition speak, and there was a lot of miscellaneous information. I think it was portrayed. No, the sheriffs and the chiefs obviously haven't said anything in opposition. As a matter of fact, I had a group of the sheriffs from Northeast Georgia here today, and none of them said anything to me because I already knew their positions. They believe in the Second Amendment. Or as a lot of the law enforcement people will tell you, that the best friend a law enforcement officer has in an emergency is a law-abiding citizen with a weapon that knows how to use it to back them up. And that's something we've always said. But I heard some of the other comments. I heard a former member being referenced and how he was run out of here. Well, I don't think he was run out. I think he resigned, or he didn't resign, but he ran for Congress, if I remember correctly. So a lot of the sensationalism that's been said is, you know, quite frankly, misinformation, and I understand it's an emotional issue to some people. Some people are just adamantly opposed to it. But I want to talk a little bit about the history. When I was elected to the General Assembly, it was a different day than it is today. When I was elected 32 years ago, either you either didn't need a permit, didn't have a permit, or you had what was recognized as a pistol toter's license. You went to the probate judge, whatever county you lived in, you gave him $5. If the probate judge recognized that you were a good citizen, or you might have been convicted of bootlegging or something, if that was considered an honorable profession in the day. But as long as you hadn't shot anybody other than your wife's lover, then you were given a license at that time. But I remember when I was elected, I remember that the first bill that I ever passed in this body was a Second Amendment bill, because at that time, you could carry a weapon in your vehicle, but you had to keep it locked in the glove compartment or in the trunk. Well, guess what kind of good that would have done? And I finally, it was like pulling teeth, but we got it moved to the compartment or somewhere under the seat so you could get to it if you ever needed it, because a gun that you can't get to, an unloaded gun, really doesn't serve the purpose for what it is. And I'll pause right here to tell you, that your weapon and your rights to have a weapon means that that is a weapon for your protection or for your sporting ability. It's a defensive weapon. It's not an offensive weapon. If it's an offensive weapon, then you are violating the law. But it's a defensive weapon for your protection. But I remember a few years later, we went on and we had a good member in here from, his name was Curtis Jenkins, and he and I, when the Brady Act was passed in Washington, we had an opportunity then that we stepped up the weapons permitting license. And we passed that law, and Curtis, he later went on to other issues and other fame and hopefully fortune by getting out of the legislature. But we passed that bill on the heels of the Brady Act, and that was to require a background check, because that background check then put us in compliance with the federal law and even circumvented the intent of the Brady Act, so that if you wanted to get a weapon, you didn't have to wait several days or weeks or whatever, because you'd already been background checked. Well, from that point on, there was a little bit of legislation passed here and there, nothing outstanding. And then, I don't know, a few years ago, Representative Jaspers and Representative Ballinger came along, and we had a guy by the name of, for those of you who don't remember, John Meadows, or the Huckleberry, as a lot of folks affectionately knew him as. And we came forth with House Bill 60, and that was a bill that we really got into the weeds about concealed weapon permits. And we passed that bill. And somewhere over in my office, if you ever come by over to my office, you'll see a picture on the back of my wall over there. It's a picture that the New York Times and the LA Times put on the front page of their paper, and they had a picture of me, and I think it was Representative Jasper's backside was showing. And it had in there on the front page of these two esteemed papers that there'll be blood in the streets in Georgia because of these dangerous individuals. Well, folks, that was about 8 years ago, and the only blood in the streets that I know of today comes from criminals, people perpetrating criminal activities. We're living in a different society. You know, I'm going to read the Constitution in a minute, but I'm going to give you another little tidbit of this. But you know, people have always had weapons. They've always had weapons because this country was founded in the blood of rebellion. It was founded in the blood of rebellion. And that's always been something that our people have always relished. I don't think that there's times in this country that people actually wanted to carry a weapon, but they carried a weapon. And usually the bad guys were always dispatched in some shape, form, or fashion. But I hear all of this talk, this anti-talk. But I just want to read a couple of things to you, and I'm going to give you another little tidbit of history, maybe to answer what some of the earlier comments have been made. If you read your Constitution on the Second Amendment, provides for a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. You know, if you believe in the law of the land, if you believe in all of those things that so many of you on the opposition party, or those who may be a little bit left, or the folks that like to, I always love to hear that saying, I'm Second Amendment's but what? You need to read, your rights shall not be infringed on. Now I want to read you the Georgia Constitution. And this is an old language that's been in there, and it deals with the arms, right to keep and bear. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, but the General Assembly shall have the power to prescribe the manner in which arms may be borne. Same language, a little bit of a version difference on the General Assembly's duty. So, for the last 100 or so, 150 years, as General Assemblies meet, they decide in which manner they'll be born, but they still keep in mind that the rights of the people shall not be infringed on, ladies and gentlemen. They shouldn't. I can talk about crime. I chaired public safety. I've been involved for 30 years, 32 years in public safety in this state and in the legislative arena. And I'm quite frankly taken back with the level of crime that I see today. I see what law enforcement officers, what they have to deal with. I know why people need to be armed, but they're not mandated to be armed. If they want to be armed and exercise their rights, they can do it. But I will tell you, whether it is a concealed weapon permit that is current or permitless carry, it's all the same. Because if you look at the statistics, it's not those people who have a permitted license that are creating harm, they're creating criminal activity. And it won't change. You're still going to see the same criminals, the ones who get their weapons a different way, by breaking into your houses or breaking into your cars. I will submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, again, you won't see blood roll in the streets with this. You'll see the same action you always will. I have even told people my personal advice to them is, because of the current concealed weapon law, that you need to keep that if you have one, because it's worth it for two fronts. One is that if you go to another state, then you'll have reciprocity if that state doesn't recognize our laws. So you'll still have that right. More importantly, you will have already met the prescription of the federal laws on going to a licensed gun dealer to buy a weapon. This is what the Second Amendment would do. I would encourage everybody here to remember this, because this is your family. It's your right to protect yourself, ladies and gentlemen. My thanks to the lady. My thanks to the so many of the members in this house that have supported this. But I do want to leave one parting thought to you on something. I kept hearing the salient point in here was about the right or the left or the extremism and such as that. Let me tell you something. There are those of us who have been here that we've been Second Amendments all along. But I want to tell you, and I want to tell some of the folks out there that continue to put out misinformation about Second Amendments in the Georgia General Assembly, or at least ways this House. You know, we've got several groups in this state that are strong Second Amendments. We've always been strong Second Amendments, but quite frankly, there's a little thing about political power and influence runs downhill. We live in a state, unfortunately, I've seen the power and the influence of the legislature wane over the whole 30 years I've been here. It's always been usurped by the power of the executive office. It's because we're a part-time legislature and the governor's there. But we never had a governor that promoted permitless carry, or that term constitutional carry. So for the naysayers out there in radio land that can hear what I'm saying, there's a lot of members of this House that's always been Second Amendment strong. But if you don't have a governor that says that he'll support the bill, we're not going to pass a bill that he's going to veto. That'd be crazy. So we now have a governor who has said that he will support permitless carry. That's the difference, ladies and gentlemen. And let's move on to the next step. And I would encourage you to cast your green vote on this board. Don't say I'm Second Amendment, but, because we know what that means. Stand up and support your Constitution, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Speaker, thank you for the time, and I will yield this well.